Nous allons maintenant nous entretenir avec le professeur Michael Rowe à l'Université Yale et au Yale Program for Recovery and Community Health. Bonjour Michael.
Bonjour.
Thank you for accepting to have this conversation with us. You know, it's for the new class of recovery mentors. And from start, we want to also embrace physical health from our experience and tradition in mental health. But I think you have maybe some concerns about the possibility of medicine taking over what is so precious to us, peer mentorship, right?
Yeah, I would say concerns, but also awareness of opportunities. The concerns, I think some of the kinds of concerns that might come up are have come up in different ways in peer work. There are folks, for example, who are people with lived experience who think that peer work belongs outside of formal systems of care or outside of mental health treatment, and that the peer work should be advocacy and peer-to-peer work that happens outside of those services, teams, and outside of treatment. So that's one point of view. Another point of view, for those who are still comfortable with having peer work integrated within treatment teams and treatment settings, still has to do with the uniqueness of the peer work and maintaining that uniqueness and its viability. Early in the stages of introducing peer work into mental health treatment teams and so forth, for example, is both uncertainty about what the peers should be doing and sometimes sort of pushing peers to the side and you make the copies and things like that. Right? But later on, once peers are more, the peer work is more understood and accepted, there's an understanding that peers do have a particular unique ability to connect with people. They have the experience of having been there, understanding, and that can work both in the sense of an appreciation and an unconditional regard and acceptance that clients, people with lived experience, experience with them, feel from them, understand from them. And at the same time, sometimes a challenging aspect of the peer work, where the peer says, now, we've talked about this before, and I have a sense that maybe you're thinking that, maybe you're getting close to having a relapse around drug use or alcohol use or whatever it might be. When you start talking about all of that wasn't so bad, sometimes it gave me a way to get away from the tensions of life and my worries and concerns and so forth. When that's happened before in the past, I know you've had relapses, right? Now, one of the things we've learned is that peers tend to be able to say that, peer mentors tend to be able to say that to people with lived experience, their clients, and have that accepted, that kind of challenge of one's behavior, and have that accepted in a way that case managers and clinicians who are not peers can't do. So, all to say that there is a special aspect of peer work. There may be some overlap with other kinds of work. If you're helping someone with, if you're a case manager and you're helping someone with their application for public housing, and you're a peer mentor and you're helping with someone with their application for public housing, obviously there's an overlap here, although the person may experience those two things differently, may feel a different kind of support from the peer. But all to say that There is something special and unique about peer work. What we learn about it changes over time, expands. What teams learn about it, what clinicians and peers learn, clinicians and case managers learn about it, changes and grows over time. Those relationships between clinicians and case managers and peers among them change over time. But there is something unique and special about peer work, and sometimes there can be concern about that getting muddied. And I think that's kind of an ongoing issue, is maintaining those boundaries, that sense of peerness within systems of care, and what is special about that, and also opening up those opportunities for people with lived experience. Not everyone has that ability to be a peer mentor just because they have lived experience, but many people with lived experience do have those skills and can build on them.
And all this comes from your work over maybe 20 years, I think now. The Citizens Project has been going on.
Right. Right, and the Citizens Project, which came out of mental health outreach, also started with peer work. We, mental health outreach to people who were homeless involves leaving the office and going out on the streets and finding and looking for people who may need help, building contact slowly, building trust, starting out with a cup of coffee, maybe building up to some help with an application for work, or for disability entitlements, or for housing, helping people get into treatment and so forth. The spark for citizenship coming out of mental health outreach was the relationship between a peer mentor and a client of the homeless outreach team who had psychiatric problems, also alcohol addiction problems, and was one of those folks that we were told we would never be able to reach, never be able to make a strong contact with, never really be able to help much. And
the situation was hopeless.
Pretty much hopeless. Not necessarily about this person, who we call Jim, specifically, but a sense from some of the folks who were not on the outreach team and had some skepticism about how successful the team would be. Is that, you know, worked with this person or some of these folks for a long time, and it didn't work out, and we tried to reconnect them to treatment, we tried to help them in other ways, and it just doesn't work, and you're going to be spinning your wheels here, right? In fact, the team was able to make contact with those folks, build trust, build that relationship, acknowledging the person's strengths, working with the person first, not the patient, and those kinds of approaches and principles. And in Jim's case, who was one of those toughest people to reach, I don't deserve any help, and there's no way you can help me anyway, so don't waste your time and don't waste mine, was the message from Jim. And it was one of our peer mentors, Ron, who was able to make that connection with Jim, build a relationship, a sort of friendship over time, and finally get him into housing, helped him to get disability entitlement income. And once we had been able to help Jim and other folks like Jim, we thought that we could do anything.
And what was so special with Ron that he succeeded where very well-skilled clinicians did it?
Ron had not been homeless himself, but he did have experience with behavioral health issues. He was not a mental health professional. He was very interested in learning. He soaked up knowledge from working with members of the team. He had, I think, a sort of a special ability to relate. Whether he would have had that without his sort of peer experience or not, I don't know, but I think it was a factor in his being able to connect with Jim, and his ability to observe things that were outside of what a clinician might be a little bit more focused around the mental health status of the person. This is not to say that clinicians can't think outside of that box at all, but that peers often have a special ability in this area. So he would notice, for example, that out on the street people were always asking things of Jim. You know, got a cigarette, Jim? Got a dollar, Jim? Can I have a cup of coffee, Jim, if you're not drinking it, you know, that kind of thing. And so Ron said, I'm not going to ask things of Jim, I'm going to bring some things to him. So he would, you know, bring a cup of coffee, a pair of socks, and so forth. He also noticed that if Jim hadn't eaten, he was going to be grouchy and it wasn't the time to talk to him. So, so things like that, and over time and with persistence and making that human connection, he was able to make that connection.
And I think the story, Jim's stories, you mentioned it in this book. Is it possible?
Citizenship and Mental Health, yeah. That's the book I wrote on this work over a period of from the mid-90s up until it was published in 2015, and the work is ongoing. And it tells the Jim story, because Jim was the story of both of peer work and outreach work, and also of the limitations of it, which had to do with the fact that once we got Jim into housing and thought we could do anything, we learned that Jim felt alone, bewildered about what to do, did not feel as though he belonged. In his apartment building, didn't know people, felt that they looked at him oddly, and they probably did, and decided he was going to go live out on the streets again. And at that point, we realized that we didn't know everything, we couldn't do everything, and that there were limitations to our work. And it was at that point that we realized that we could do everything except help people become neighbors, community members, and citizens. And here, peers had and continue to have a very strong, to have been an integral part of the citizenship process and learning and interventions. From early on, from planning our first intervention to running the first citizenship intervention, the Citizens Project, co-facilitating that with the project director as peer mentors, to developing a measure of citizenship with peer researchers who were engaged, involved, and it learned every stage of the measure development process, and continuing as we take citizenship to scale within mental health systems of care and outside in the community at large.
And you mentioned this capacity for peers to relate, and maybe a lack of sense of belongingness for people like Jim. So maybe the peers can see how to have the person feel more connected to the community. Is that the idea?
Yeah. So we define citizenship according to the 5 R's of rights, responsibilities, roles, resources, and relationships that full members of society have access to. We also defined it as a sense of belonging. Belonging wherever you are, belonging as part of your community, belonging in society, and a validation from others of that belonging. So the validation that peers provide to people of, yes, you do belong. Again, not to say that others can't do that, but that peers have a special ability, especially early on, in making those connections and engaging with people to make those connections and to give that message. and peers can also teach others. So it's not, although clinicians and case managers and peer mentors have specific and unique roles, they can also learn from each other. So 20 years ago, when people would say, you want to bring a person with mental illness onto our team, why would you want to do that? First of all, that person's not stable. How is that person going to be able to deal with this very difficult work? Second, that person isn't trained. And third, we're working with very ill people, like this person you're trying to bring in here, so why would you be doing that? And that can be a long road when you're starting off from scratch like that. And it's through experience and through research that we've learned that in fact peers can do this work. They can do it in a special way, that they have special skills to bring to into mental health teams and work, and outside it as well. Peer-to-peer individuals, peer-run organizations, peer-run businesses, advocacy groups, and so forth, often run completely by peers. So that there's a whole range of peer experience and work, both inside of and outside of mental health care, both individually, person to person, and within advocacy organizations.
And from a theoretical perspective, you introduced citizenship, you merged it with recovery somehow?
So for a time, recovery and citizenship kind of operated in their separate spheres, with an understanding that there was complementarity to a certain degree, and that there was a common belief and appreciation of the personhood of the person with lived experience of psychiatric issues. Over time, and now, we're talking about the concept of recovering citizenship. So if recovery is so huge that you can look at it in a lot of different ways, and recovery has very strong social roots in the disability rights movement, in the psychiatric survivor movement, but over time, sometimes there's been a tendency for recovery to be seen as sort of subjective sense of being a person in recovery. I am a person in recovery, which is fine. But an overemphasis on that piece of it can eclipse or shut out the more social aspects and connections that are also relevant to recovery. If citizenship is more socially oriented and at some point even more politically advocacy oriented related, which is not to say recovery is not, it is as well. But if citizenship in its main focus is more related to the outside systems of care, to the community as one's membership in the community as a whole, valued roles, access to resources, full membership in the community. It can also benefit from the core message of recovery that the person with a mental illness is a person first, is not shut off from hopes and dreams and ambitions and relationships and achieving those things, and that core message of recovery is important to citizenship, while citizenship brings and reminds recovery of that social aspect of recovery. And so the two together can can help each other, and sort of the term of recovering citizenship is to try to sort of bring both of those two together. And we're really in the early stages of thinking about that, but it's not so much a totally new thing as a way of saying how can one help the other, support the other, teach, and how can the two together potentially do more than either one does alone.
And what is going on now? You have this Citizenship Connecticut Collaboration, the CCC, or maybe it's not
the Citizens Community Collaborative, yeah,
okay.
With funding from the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and we've also had funding from NIMH, and we'll be continuing to pursue those sources as well as others. But the CCC, Citizens Community Collaborative, is mainly funded by the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, which has been a main source of funding for recovery, for the program for recovery in community health, and other arenas as well, with other organizations. And not to speak for the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, but I think there's a sense that citizenship is in some ways a next stage of the recovery work. That recovery is not without issues, and not without glitches, and not without problems, and but recovery is in a very different place it was in 2000. Recovery is now in community mental health centers and clinics, and it's the notions of recovery are pretty well known, and the ideas of recovery are pretty well accepted. Not necessarily by everyone, not necessarily completely, but there's strong support for the notion of recovery. There's strong connection between and integration of recovery and peer community, and that citizenship, with this social focus, collective focus, group as well as individual focus, is in some ways a next stage of the recovery work. We talk about sort of two different ways that you can support citizenship. One is individual supports for the person to gain access to the 5 R's and a sense of belonging, and that can happen in different ways. It can happen through what we're beginning to work on around the notion of citizenship-oriented care, in some ways similar to the notion of recovery-oriented care, in that you can't do someone's recovery for them, but you can provide care that is consistent with, supportive of the principles of, and it's supportive of the person's own recovery. In the same, in a similar way, you can't do someone's citizenship for them. You can't make them a full citizen in the sense of our definition of citizenship, but you can, at least in theory, provide services that support the principles of citizenship and support people's gaining access to the 5 R's and a sense of belonging. So that at the individual level you can support people. At the collective level, one of the principles of citizenship is that society has a responsibility to bring in from the margins people who have been excluded. How that happens involves advocacy, social action. It's not as though society just wakes up one morning and says, oh, we've been excluding you, now we're going to, sorry about that, we overlooked that, we'll change that. As we know from the civil rights movement and the ongoing civil rights movement and its children, that is a thing of a product of social action and advocacy and collective work that can also be individually empowering.
Yeah. think it's part of the Citizens Project, actually, huh?
Yeah.
For individuals to do some kind of a speech,
Yeah.
politically oriented, or...
Yeah, and I would also say that I should note that there's some integration and interplay between the individual and the collective aspects. The Citizens Project is a good example of that because it's a group activity. It's individually empowering. It's collectively empowering. So if in one, for the classes, for example, that are arranged around, designed around the 5 R's, could be access to housing, which mainly would be the R of resource, and there's overlap among the the 5 R's as well. But various topics, from very practical ones to somewhat more abstract ones, such as one's rights and responsibilities in relation to the criminal justice system. If you have previous criminal charges or incarceration, your rights and responsibilities in relation to the mental health system, how you can stand up for yourself, certainly so. But it's also a collective and group activity, and it's also a community. And then near the end, and then there are valued role projects, which are projects that are valued by the person. This is something I'm interested in, this is something I care about, but that also are valued in society. So for example, if you want to raise money for a charity, that's something that is meaningful to you for whatever reason that might be. It could be your own experience, family members' experience. It could be just your desire to give back. That's something that motivates you. It's also socially valued. Doing for others, giving to this charity, helping people. The speeches in which people talk about what they've learned about themselves, what they've learned about from the Citizens Project, what they've learned going forward, and their sort of next steps in sort of enhancing their own citizenship, and often others as well through their work with them.
People, maybe they were reluctant to see themselves on the stage doing a speech at the beginning.
Yeah. It's challenging, it can be frightening, it's, I'm not good at that kind of thing, and so what happens is that, and it's also coming near the end of the 6-month Citizens Project, so people are thinking, oh, I'm going to be moving on, and the speeches and what I've learned are associated with that, and so it can be a difficult time, but growing and learning are difficult times, often, right? And what happens is people have an opportunity to be filmed like this, giving their speeches or a draft of their speeches, and being critiqued by their fellow students. They're students, not clients of the Citizens Project. And then eventually giving their speeches to others in graduation or in other situations. And the giving of the speech itself is a sort of a complicated kind of thing. If you're giving a speech, you need to think about what is it I'm going to speak about. Well, you have some ideas because you're given a certain format for your speeches. What have I learned about myself? What have I learned about from the Citizens Project and so forth? But how am I going to talk about that? Well, you have to think about that. Maybe you need to take some notes. Maybe you need to do a little research. Maybe you need to talk to others, get their thoughts. Maybe you need to try it in front of a friend before you try it in front of the class. You have to think about, maybe you have a time limit. Maybe it's 5 minutes. How do I say what I need to say in 5 minutes? And so there's a kind of learning process that's involved with giving a speech, giving of yourself. There's a public aspect of it. You are now speaking to your fellow citizens. The experience of doing this may help you speak in front of legislators who are considering actions that have an impact on people with lived experience of psychiatric problems, or who are poor, or whatever the issue might be.
And this has been done.
And we've done that, yes.
Yeah.
Or I should say the students have done that.
And what was the reception?
The reception is when people tell their own stories, it has a very, and do it well, it has a very powerful impact. And because people speak from their experience, they speak from their heart, and they speak about what they know, and they know it intimately, they know it over time, they've learned it the hard way, and there is an authority that they have about that thing that they're talking about their experience, about this situation, about being poor, about having psychiatric problems and being homeless and being out on the street and being approached by police officers who are looking at them as dangerous folk, right? Because most of us living in our culture or living in different cultures have certain associations with mental illness. It's strange, it's other, it's scary, it's permanent, it's all of these things. It's I need to be on my guard. It's whatever people are carrying around, whatever baggage they're carrying from their lives, from what they've learned, and to carry some of, even if that baggage is hidden away pretty much, and you say, well, people are people, and that's just the way things are, and I don't have any of those kinds of feelings. We have cultural baggage that we carry around with us that we're either aware of or we're not aware of, or a little bit of both, right? To see and hear someone from the Citizens Project talking about his or her experience passionately but calmly in an organized way, in a powerful way, as a person like any other person, but a person with the authority of lived experience, as we all have authority with the things that we know about. When we talk about the things that we love, that we're passionate about, we talk differently, we look differently, we come across, we make an impact in a different way. That in itself has an impact. It makes a difference. Visually, being in the same room with that person. And the message, of course, too, has an impact in the two together. This is not to say that experts, so-called experts, or academics, or people who, social scientists, who have their own particular expertise, they have an impact as well. They have the impact of data, and may have their own passions. This is a different kind of very personal, but social experience and knowledge. It's social because that person is up at the legislature. The legislature makes policy that affects people, that affects families, that affects communities. It's happening in that forum. It's personal, it's social, it's those things, and it has can have a very powerful impact.
Well, it's a beautiful story. Maybe there's another side to it. Maybe at some point some people were disappointed by maybe at first the reception is warm, welcoming, and maybe not much happens afterwards.
Yeah, this happened, with the Valley Roll projects, especially early on. One of them was actually raising money for a charity, and first of all, it was difficult. There were people anticipated much more response than they got. There was the disappointment of it. There can be even with something that's reasonably successful, when it's over, it's like, now what? But that's life too, you know? Disappointments and dealing with disappointment, and dealing with disappointments and experiencing what it takes to make something work, the thinking, the planning, the cooperation, the collaboration is important too. And learning how to do that better the next time. And also learning how doing it right the next time does not guarantee success. Or may give you partial success, but not exactly what you dreamed of. And that's life too. And that's an important lesson, and a lesson that can have an impact on how you cope, how, you know, your sort of long range plans, you know, what you get involved with, what you think about, the choices you make. Or if I'm going to do this, I know now that I'm going to have to give a little more time to it, or I'm going to need to be personally ready for it in a way maybe that I wasn't before, or maybe that I'm not right now, but maybe a few months from now, and all of those kinds of things, which are all the things that we all have to deal with. These are not issues for people with mental illnesses. You know, they're not issues for people who, you know, are students of the Citizens Project. These are life issues. They have their own particular flavor and aspects for everyone when they're engaged in the middle of them. But these are the problems and opportunities and riches and difficulties of life.
For the individual.
Yeah.
And for the organization, what were the lessons learned from the
and for collective too, because these were often were collective projects. So you know, using the fundraising project, you know, you realize that first of all, you had to work with others, and I may be feeling a certain passion, you know, for what we're doing, and I've just sensed that you don't seem to have that. You know, you don't seem to be spending as much time on that as I am, or you have a view of how we go about that it's quite different from mine. So what do we do about that? Well, maybe we need to talk about it. Maybe you're holding, my perception that you're holding back comes from your feeling that I'm doing all the talking at these meetings, right? And you want to have an opportunity. Maybe there's a potential compromise between our two ideas about how we go about, you know, achieving this objective of raising some money for this charity. And then what does that? What do we learn from that for, you know, in our work with others in other settings, or an experience of advocacy of going up to the legislature as a group? So as individuals experiencing that, but also experiencing that in a sense of being part of something that's important and exciting and could make a difference.
And from a university point of view, a scientist point of view, what is the new knowledge there? We learned something differently that we didn't know.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of research on the on peer mentors. We've done a lot of research on recovery. We've done a lot of research on citizenship. Often this mixes both so-called quantitative research, numbers-based research, high-end numbers of participants. Often it's qualitative, so-called qualitative, in-depth, open-ended interviews and discussions. Sometimes it's ethnographic work, so my work around homelessness, part of it involved, you know, going out onto the streets with the outreach teams, going out with them, going out on my own, walking through the soup kitchen line, talking to people, seeing what that was like, just to stand in line waiting to eat, and getting a sense of what things are like in the particular area that you're studying. And so in the area of peers, for example, we've learned about the particular ability of peers to engage with people, to make connections with people, to motivate people for self-help or for engagement into treatment. Around citizenship, we've done both quantitative and qualitative work. From one study that we did, which was a randomized controlled trial comparing outcomes of various sorts, from quality of life to substance use and change in that, and so forth, to the experience of being the individual and collective experience through participant observation, being part of the process, observing it, asking people about their experience, and in-depth interviews. We've learned that the Citizens Project can have positive impact on quality of life for people, for participants, for students. We've learned that it can reduce alcohol and substance use over time, or supports that reduction. We've also learned that in the more qualitative area of things, that being a student. So we think about, you're going to be a student and then you're going to do a value role. As a student, you learn. Now that you've learned, you're going to put your learning into practice with the value role, which is true, but we also learned that being a student is a special thing in and of itself for students. Often because people haven't done well in school before and feel that they've failed and feel that it held them back. Or it can be what their student's about, citizenship and taking on a project and becoming part of a community that has it, that is special and different and opens up new avenues for people. So being a student, we learned, was a valued role in and of itself. We also learned that, I'll just speak for myself, contrary to my initial idea, this is a little bit of a simplification, but it's the sort of idea that, well, okay, you're sort of a non-citizen over here, as the person who's homeless or is coming out of prison or a person with mental illness, and over here we will give you this opportunities to sort of engage in the issues and elements of citizenship so that you can go out here and be a full citizen. But of course, that's not the way it happens for any of us. We are, if we have a sense of ourselves as being citizens, part of that sense and our everyday experience of it comes out of the things that we do, comes out of the work that we do. I'm a researcher, I'm a member of this or that, I work for this or that business, that is my community as well. My faith community, whatever it might be, my social community, so out of all of these sort of communities and identities that we have, friendships, family, that also becomes part of our overall sense of community, and it has an overlap. So that if we have strong connections in some of these areas, then when we walk down the street in our neighborhood, and that has nothing to do in that moment with our family, with our work, with our church or whatever it might be, but it contributes to our sense of, yeah, I belong here. There may be other reasons. You may be doing things in your community and block parties and organizing voter registration or whatever it might be, but there's also a spillover from these other groups that we have, so that we walk down the street or we go downtown and we're shopping or walking around and talking to people, and we have a sense of belonging that partly comes from our belonging in other areas, and not only our belonging but being validated as belonging. Not just, you can sit here with us, we will accept you, we will include you, but we need you, you're important. We can't do this without you. You add something unique, you change what we do, right? You add to it.
So somehow that's what you're saying to the students of the first cohort of the recovery mentors.
Right.
That they do belong to university, faculty of medicine.
Right.
Even though they might doubt it, maybe it's that they never anticipated that it would be there.
Right.
But it's important to the university as a community for them to feel that this is where they also belong.
Right. You're pioneers. Pioneers, we would say in the U.S. I don't know if it would have the same meaning in Canada, but yes, pioneers. And after the pioneers come the next group, who then feel I'm part of a tradition. So in the Citizens Project, for example, there's the pioneering aspect of getting it started, learning how to do it, and adding new elements. And over time, there's a sense of being part of something that continues, even if you're not part of that particular cohort. So if you go through the training, you may not be doing it again, but you're now part of a tradition. That may be a small or a large part of your life, but you're part of a community, a learning community. In the Citizens Project, for example, people will come back, and they usually come back for one of two reasons. One is, I want to tell you what I'm doing. I'm doing, I got a new job, I just got married, I get this. Another might be, I'm having a tough time, and I know that I can talk to you, folks. I know you will understand. Or combinations of those in various ways.
It's a powerful message. We are not yet in a tradition, but eventually, with such a good stories to share and to create new stories as well. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good questions.